So good afternoon to Presido Project's Forefront 2021 and this session on data and key performance indicators for enrollment and admissions. My name is Jesse Roberts. I'm the CEO of Unbound 360. We will be getting started here in a second. I'm looking forward to sharing some great content with you and some ideas on what information you need to be tracking at your school to be most effective. So as we let people into the session, there is a poll question up that I'd like to get your input on. And I'm basically asking what's the most important statistic at your school that you track? Do you track inquiries, applicants, or tours? And which one of those is the most important to you? And if there's another one that you track, tell us about it. We are always interested to see what schools are doing when it comes to tracking their data and seeing what's important to them. So please make sure you jump in on the poll. We'll come back and touch base on that here shortly. So without further ado, as people are filing in, let's go ahead and jump in. I've got a lot of data to get to today, a lot of information, and looking forward to sharing with you. So briefly, just our agenda today, I want to make sure that we are all looking at the same thing, which is really about understanding why key performance indicators are important for you and your school. We want to take a deep dive into some metrics. We're going to look at those KPIs, and I have a free tool that I'm making available for you that will help you measure some of those KPIs in a spreadsheet that I've built. Keep things nice and easy and make it manageable for your school. And you don't need to be an Excel wizard to manage any of it. So looking forward to getting that in your hands as well. So big picture, this session is really about Catholic schools and being different and being better. Every Catholic school I've ever worked in, I feel like this is their Latin motto, which translated essentially means this: we've always done it this way. And what I want to be imparting on you today is that we, as a industry, need to be better and need to be thinking more about our work as a business. And businesses use key performance indicators to understand where they're succeeding, where they're failing, and where they can be better on a day-to-day basis. So I'd like your mindset today to be very open to doing things differently, to being open-minded about where we're going for the future, okay? So briefly, just a little bit about me. When it comes to the Catholic school world, I have basically worn every hat that there is, except principal, essentially. I have worn all the hats, and my most important role of all of the ones that you see listed here is parent. I'm a parent to two teenagers in Catholic high schools here in Baltimore, and very much focused on making sure that those schools not only stay alive, but thrive and continue to serve the community in the way that they do. So I'm very excited about that. From a big picture standpoint, obviously, I have had kind of an interesting career, but when I graduated from college, I spent a couple of years playing professional soccer. One of the teams that I played for was owned by Richard Petty, pictured here, the STP 43 car in NASCAR. So I learned a lot about marketing from the guys in his office. I used to go down to the team offices after practice every day, and just spend time listening to them talk, getting as much information as I could, picking their brains, learning about marketing from real professionals. Following my playing career, I got into coaching. I was fortunate enough to coach at Clemson University for a little while. Learned a lot at Clemson about branding, but really about recruiting and how best to fill the team's funnel and make sure that we always had the best student athletes available. And I really enjoyed my time at Clemson. It's a pretty special place. If you never ever get the chance to go down to Clemson, South Carolina, do that. And then finally, technology. I have always been very interested in technology and in making sure that the work that we do is supported by tech. More often than not, I've been working in offices where I was the only person, or maybe there's one or two people in admissions. So technology really had to fill the gap to make sure that we were able to be as efficient as possible. So you'll see some things today that will hopefully help to keep those pieces all connected. So Big picture. This is a very scary slide, admittedly, but more often than not, most of the databases that you use in your school to track your admissions, your events, is based on this. And this is a relationship graph for a standard relationship database. And so you'll see that you've got events that are tied to different people, to different tasks, to different guests and agendas. And this is what it all looks like. And this is admittedly spaghetti, and there's a lot going on here. I don't expect you to understand it necessarily, but the point is, if you think about the way that data is connected, each one of these little gray boxes is essentially an Excel spreadsheet. And when you think about what happens at your school, how many different Excel spreadsheets do you have connected with all the different data, right? So what I want us to be thinking about is that the relational databases, as we consider them now, you're forced to use queries, and you're forced to try and ask questions of a database, and you usually won't get a response without some sort of relationship. How many students went to St. Margaret's School? Well, there has to be a relationship between that student and St. Margaret's School to give you a response. More often than not, however, the databases that we have are really complex. You typically might even have to have a specialist on your campus, and that's all they do. They work on databases. And sometimes if you've got too much data or you've got bad data, you can have a very slow system as well as a system that doesn't give you the information you need. And where we want to make sure we're getting to is a place where the information we get back is not only clean, but it's great, and it helps us to drive decisions and make sure that we're doing the right things in the admissions office. So that's where things are really important, okay? So when I think about technology and I think about the work that we do in the admissions office, it really is about making sure that the work is efficient and that it's clean and that it gives us the information we need to make sure that we're doing our jobs the best as possible. In the admissions office, you're talking about responsibility for 90% of the school's revenue. That's a big responsibility. And even if your school doesn't have an admissions office per se, and maybe it's the principal's job, that is still a very heavy responsibility to make sure that the lights stay on and there are kids in the building. So this is important, and that's why we want to make sure that we've got really good data behind the work that we're doing. Just to give you a little more idea here, there's a concept that's called a graph database, and graph databases store those facts and relationships together. And you'll see that different pieces are connected based on those vectors, and they're nearly limitless. And you probably use a graph database every day and you don't even know it. If you do any shopping on Amazon, that's a graph database, because all of those products, all of those reviews, all of the things that you search for are all connected in a graph database fashion. That's why it's so fast. That's why you can instantly get 500 products recommended to you. As soon as you look up, an iPhone screen cover, you'll have 100 of them recommended. And as soon as you start to look at them, other relationships will pop up, and they'll start to recommend charging cables, docking stations. And hey, if you like this, maybe you might want to get, you might want to buy an iPad. Like, they might do all those different things and then connect those pieces together. And that happens with a graph database. Well, why is that important? It's important just to make sure that you understand that good data and having good data connected is what's going to help you get where you need to go to track what's going on at your school. So when you think about it from a big picture standpoint, now this graph is essentially set up, and if you think about it in terms of a typical business where they have all of these different data centers that are connecting with all of the data in the center, right? Then all of the different business units get great information out. So if you think about it on this side, where you have admissions and development and your academic office and your guidance and counseling, you've got all this student information and student data here in the center, then that gives you the ability to do some really great work on the outside, because everyone's working together with the right data. I can't tell you how many times I've talked to schools that use 8 or 9 different data platforms, and none of them talk to each other. So somebody calls into the school, they call into the front office, and they leave a message about admissions information. Admissions gets the data, but you have no idea that this person's actually an alum. You have no idea that they're actually connected to somebody in the school. So having all these data pieces connected is really important. So think about it from this perspective, right? Think about where your parents are. I think about my relationship with my son's school because at one point I was a teacher at the school. I'm an alum at the school. I'm also a donor. So I check off 3 boxes right there. And if your data isn't connected properly, you can miss that. Students can be a wide variety of opportunities there as well, right? Students can be legacy. Students can come back as alums and teachers. Teachers can be alums, parents, or donors. So this information is all really important. And so I hope you understand that when we're talking about this data and connecting this as we move forward for these key performance indicators, we've got to make sure that we have very clean information going in and then coming out. So let's talk about some key performance indicators, or KPI, and what you really need to know when you're thinking about your admissions efforts. Now, this is a sample dashboard from a university, from a university software platform. And you should be thinking about ways to have your key performance indicators at your schools mapped out on a very simple graph basis like this, so that very quickly you know what's important. And for this particular school, they care about their retention rates by gender. They care about retention rates by their campus, right? So you might have lower, middle, and upper at your school. You want to make sure that you're tracking your retention rates. You want to track your retention rates by ethnicity. You might want to track your retention rates by grade level. So when you think about this, these are easy ways to display information and get you right to the fingertips of what you need. Get it quickly so that you can answer those questions when they come up. And I can't tell you how many times I've had board members ask questions, and if we just had a dashboard, we would be able to answer them not only quickly, but we'd also be able to show the data as it was related to other pieces of information in our schools process. So we're going to look at some key performance indicators and what you probably track now, as well as things that you really should care about moving forward. Okay, so we're going to start with inquiries right off the bat. As I think about the standard inquiry, this is really almost a dead statistic now. More people are doing what I call the shadow application, where they are basically spending a bunch of time on your website, and the first time you hear from a family is the very first time that they apply. You don't have an inquiry anymore. And so now the inquiry numbers are actually going down, and the application number stays the same. So this doesn't necessarily help you with any information. And more often than not, the schools that we work with have inquiry forms that are 30 and 40 fields long. You don't need an inquiry to tell you everything that you need right off the bat. And when you think about Amazon, what's the most important thing on Amazon, right? If you look at, very simply, Amazon.com, what's the most important button on here? So let's just go into something I recently viewed. Here's a TV I looked at. Right here, buy it now. That is the most important button on Amazon. They've taken all the friction out of the buying decision. Just one click, in you go, right? That's where we should be with all of the work that we do with our inquiries. Let's make it easier for families to get in and get the conversation started. When you think about the inquiry in general, it's really just kind of the start of the buying conversation. I mean, it's a signal, but it doesn't give you a lot of information. So we want to make sure that that inquiry that we start gives us something, but that actually it gives us something that we can work with. So I'm going to propose that instead of tracking the inquiry, we track what's called velocity. And velocity is literally how fast a prospect moves between the stages of your funnel. How fast does it take someone to go from being an inquiry, if you have that as a stage, to being a tour, and from a tour to a shadow day, and from a shadow day to an application, and then from the acceptance stage, how fast do they turn around to being enrolled? And you should measure every one of those stage changes for each and every prospect you have. The shorter the time that stage change is, the more engaged they are. And that engagement shows you the real buying signal. If they're jumping on something quickly and booking that tour right away, and they're jumping in quickly and booking that shadow day right away, that shows you their level of engagement. You can use that information later on, which is really great to help you, measure your admission process, to make sure that the admission staff is doing what they're supposed to. But you can also use that velocity to perhaps in your financial aid decisions. How fast somebody jumps through the hoops is typically a great indicator to show you how long they're going to stay with you from a retention standpoint. So really looking forward to seeing how schools think about velocity, because velocity is a very important statistic. When you think about this, and I would encourage you perhaps to even change the name from inquiry to interest, right? People can express their interest in a number of different ways. And, I think about many websites now where you've got a little chat bot in the bottom corner. And that chat bot is a really great little way to start a conversation. And that could really be your inquiry. So if you start with that little expression of interest, now you can start to see your average, like how long does it typically take someone to go from the expression of interest to the tour? And how many days does it take, right? And you're tracking the durations. And those people that move through faster, how many of them are you actually getting to enroll at the school? So tracking that in terms of wins and losses is also a really important component here. So it's not just about how many people go through the funnel, it's how many people do you engage? How many people do you get to make that jump and go to the next level? Very important. Second, you're probably tracking the number of applicants you have, of course, right? That makes a lot of sense. What we wanted you to think about is MROI, and we'll talk about that in a second. So typically, you're tracking your applicants, and there are some markets in the country that are using a common application, which makes it really easy for a family to apply to 4, 5, 10 private schools all at once. So yes, you are getting more applicants, but you don't know if they've actually engaged with you in any way, shape, or form other than checking a box on a common app. So that application is nice, but it could actually be a dead application. Someone just filled it out because they wanted to make sure they had 3 instead of doing 2, and you were just the lucky one who got the 3rd. So while an applicant is a very important statistic to make sure you're keeping track of, you also need to know, was there any activity with that applicant ahead of time? Many websites allow you the ability to track the use of someone of your own school's website by an applicant, right? So you can see if they've been on your soccer page or looked at your campus ministry page and then applied, right? So you have the ability to track some of that. But that's really important. But the application is just part of the story. What I want us to be thinking about, the application is the end result. That's great. What I'd like us to think about is marketing return on investment. And as a statistic, what that really helps us get to is how effective our marketing spend is into our funnel. So when you think about it this way, you're basically taking your entire marketing budget and you're dividing it into your funnel to see how much it costs you to get each and every person in that funnel. So for instance, with a $50,000 fictional budget, I know some of you may be laughing to think about the idea of, we wish we had 50K, but it just makes the math easy. Okay, so I get that. But the idea here is that with a $50,000 marketing budget, you get 500 inquiries. You've basically spent $100 for each inquiry in your funnel. For every applicant at $250, that's $200 per applicant. And for every enrolled student at the end of the day, it costs $500. So if you think about what that return on investment is, that $500 to enroll a student, well, if that student sticks around for 8 years and your tuition is $10,000, $500 has turned into $80,000. We'll talk about that a little bit more in a second. But what I want you to think about from the return on investment standpoint is being smart about where your advertising dollars go and what you actually get back based on each stage in the funnel. So tracking MROI is really important and something that I think each school should be really paying attention to. For those of you who are just joining in, and we've got a bunch of people that have just joined in the last few minutes here, it looks like, there is a poll question up in which we're asking what the most important statistic at your school is that you currently track. Whether is it inquiries, applicants, tours, or do you have an other? And I'd love to see what your responses are for this. And we'll talk about that in a few minutes. So getting back to our talk, other key performance indicators are obviously you might be tracking open house visitors, and I'd like you to be thinking more along the lines of engagement and lead scoring. So what does that mean? So, you know, we have schools that really track their open house registrations, which is really important, obviously, to make sure that you know how many people are going to be coming to an open house, coming to an event. That's important. And that's the kind of thing that you should be tracking, especially year over year, to know how well your marketing efforts are going for you. What I think is really important, though, is, you know, great, they've been to campus, now what? So using an open house visitor as a KPI is good, but there's one more piece to that, and that is the next step. What did they do after they came to open house? Did they schedule a tour right away? Did they schedule their shadow day right away? What did they do immediately after the open house? Okay, and again, very important, we've got on the campus, and that's the golden rule of admissions, right? If we can just get them on campus, we've got them. I can't tell you how many times I've heard that, right? So what we want to make sure is that once we get them, pardon me, once we get them, that we have something to track in that next step. And thankfully, we do. And what I want you to think about is engagement scoring. And this is something that I started doing when I was a director of admissions at a boarding school. And what I found was there were essentially 6 major things that somebody had to do before I knew we were going to enroll them, in terms of steps in the process and how quickly they did them. And I basically built a score sheet for each and every applicant. And what we're able to figure out is as soon as somebody got to an 80% on there, their probability of enrolling will almost double. Okay, so this is really important to be able to think about it in terms of engagement. So the more, and think about it from your own perspective, right? The more engaged you are with something, the more likely you are to buy. If you were to look, if you're looking to buy a new car, perhaps, it's very rare that you just go on a website, click on the first car you see and buy it, right? You're going to do research. You're going to be looking at the statistics. You're going to be looking at what other people say about the car. You're going to be looking at video. You're going to be really engaged with the process. And the more engaged you are with any particular product, whether it's a car or a school, the more engaged you are, the more likely you are to commit to the purchasing decision. So what we want to be able to do is say, look, let's track all of this right now. There's a website service out there called Full Story that can show you exactly how engaged each and every prospect is on your website and show you in real time what they're doing on your website. You can see how engaged each and every prospect is. That's really powerful information, and that kind of scoring can allow you to do a lot of great work when it comes to managing your financial aid budget, as well as managing your acceptance offers. You know, would you want to offer admission to somebody who's super engaged and all over the website, or somebody who's only been on there once or twice, right? That person who's super engaged is someone who's more likely to be a wild evangelist for you and a big fan. Those are the kind of folks you want on your campus. So what I'm going to suggest is that you connect this engagement back to your prospect data. And if you can show that each and every prospect has a certain level of engagement, that's going to help you make a big decision when it comes time for financial aid, or also when it comes time to make an acceptance offer. So for me, what this gives is a real visibility into probability for enrollment. And you'll hear this called predictive analytics. There's a company out there called OThought, and OThought does this work in the higher ed space. And they started, and they had this fascinating study where they looked at Carnegie Mellon University, and that's the first school they worked with. And Carnegie Mellon wanted to have a very clear idea of how many freshmen they were going to have on their opening day, because that freshman enrollment was key to making sure they hit all their revenue goals. And with understanding the behavior of their prospective families and understanding the behavior of the kids and all the things that went into it, OThought predicted that their freshman class would be something along the lines at 4,538 students. And their admissions office said, wow, that's pretty specific, that's interesting. And they went through the entire enrollment cycle and they ended up at 4,542. So this engagement piece is really important, and it really gives you that probability early on. Heads of school and principals like to have good information early, and engagement scoring helps you get there earlier in the process. This is a leading indicator, not lagging. When you think about inquiries and applicants, those are all lagging indicators because those happen after the fact. This kind of engagement scoring is happening as the process is going on, and that's a leading indicator, and that will tell you a couple of things. Obviously, are you having the right conversations with the right people, A, but B, is the spend that you're making on financial aid going to be accepted, going to be used by a family? That's the kind of information that you really want to get to. Bigger picture though, this engagement scoring is a leading indicator of retention. If a family stays engaged, they're going to stay enrolled. That's what we want. We want families who are going to be wild fans of our school. We want to keep them enrolled for as long as we can. And by understanding their engagement with us and our process, we're going to know that information earlier so that we can make really good decisions on, especially if we need to have like a retention team in place to keep those families enrolled and happy with us. So what I want you to think about again is, a prospect scoring system. So there's a number of different ways to skin this cat. So, this isn't just a one way to do this. But you can look at a prospect score and you can rate them on a number of different things. This is one that I was looking at a couple of different colleges when I first started doing this work, 10 years or so ago. And colleges were being really specific in looking at what the score range is for their prospects. And this is out of 1, right? And so the higher up you go, the net deposit rate goes up, right? So obviously, the more engaged that these families are, the more likely they are to move up the funnel from applicant to inquiry, admit to inquiry, and then net deposit to inquiry. So if you are really engaged, what this is saying is 69,364 people inquired that had an engagement score of 90% to 100%. And they enrolled 5,561 of those people. So that's the kind of information that we're trying to get to, right? In terms of making sure that we're on top of this. Make the scoring work for your school, obviously. The big thing for me is to get from predictive analytics to prescriptive analytics. And what that means is we want to make sure that we're doing everything we can to push a prospect to do the next thing, to put the next piece of content in front of them that's going to guarantee they're going to make that next step. So you might have a communication strategy that's going to drive a number of pieces of content to a particular family. And if they only manage to do 3 of them, they might not have a great score. But if they engage with 4 of them or 5 of them or 6 of them or 8 of them, their scoring is going to go up, and that's going to give a much cleaner view in terms of what they're going to do down the funnel. This doesn't take a lot of work to put together. You just have to think about the pieces that you do send out with your collateral. So you have to think, and be a little bit more thoughtful in terms of your collateral and your an audit of kind of the when and where you send things. But the more that you can plan for this, you're going to have a much better view into the total picture when it comes down to enrollment. When we think about retention, and this is just a side conversation, please stop using headcount as a key performance indicator. Okay, headcount is not where we want to be. You don't want to say we need 100 freshmen. That's not what we want. You want to make sure that you have an expected tuition number, and that expected tuition number is also tied to a total contract value. Don't just use how many kids are in the building. Talk about it in terms of revenue, because that is what admissions is really all about. It's about revenue management and that front side of the house. And I'll show you what I mean in the demo in a second. Finally, the last one that we want to look at is source of prospect, and I want to get to the lookalike matrix. So before, you're probably doing some omni-channel marketing, which means, you're putting things out there on Facebook, and you might have yard signs, and you might be doing some radio ads, and you might have things in your local Catholic newspaper, and you're doing things in the bulletin. Great. All those things are great. What's really hard with a lot of that is understanding like where the first time that somebody heard of you. I would argue that you probably couldn't remember the first time you heard of Coke or the first time you heard of Apple, but those are brands that you're probably familiar with and are part of your conversation, right? So the source for many of those companies, it's difficult to pinpoint where they first heard of you, right? So for us, source matters when it comes down to tracking that ROI for marketing, right? So did you put an ad on Google? Okay, great. Can we track how many people came in from that ad? How many people clicked? How many people applied? How many people enrolled, right? That's what we need to get to. So that source is important, but it's not as important really than when we come down to what we call a lookalike matrix. Again, the more engaged you are, the more likely you are to buy. But what we want to be able to do is to take this data, and as we're looking at our particular families, we want to know exactly what things are important to our current student body, right? We want to know what data is important, because that's going to help us understand the probability of moving them in the funnel. If we know our families, we're going to know what's going to make them tick. We're going to know what's going to make those people take that next step with us. Okay, so big picture, a lookalike matrix essentially shows you, pardon me, essentially shows you what factors are important to your families at any given time, and helps you to craft your messaging, craft your marketing, and understand what you need to do next to make sure that you're capturing the right number of people on campus. This is an example of a lookalike matrix, and we're basically looking at families in the Houston market. And when you look at this, in this particular school, they are underrepresented nationally by 68% on families whose most valuable property is between $1 and $250,000. So we're getting information right away, and from a key performance indicator standpoint, real estate is something we want to pay attention to, and this is a very clear indication that real estate is a big deal for this particular school. Okay. So lookalike matrix is a very important indicator, and something that we really want to make sure we're paying attention to. I mentioned earlier net tuition revenue and total contract value as a thing that we want to be on top of. And NTR, net tuition revenue, essentially is a description of how much we should expect in tuition from each and every family. And there's a couple of things that come into play with that. One is obviously our retention rate, and two is our financial aid rate. Okay, and that goes into your net tuition revenue, every family that comes in the door. The second piece of that is total contract value, and that is the value of how much one particular family, what that value is for your school. So let me grab this for a second. I've, of course, lost my window. There we go. So what is important here is that we need to make sure that we have really good information. And I want to show you that with this tool that I'm making available for all of you who are members here for the Presido project. So essentially, this file is available, and there's a link that I'll put in the chat. You basically start off by saying, which grades do we offer? And when we get that information, we can then start to track our net tuition revenue by how many years are in our school, and only basically play with the figures in yellow. But if your tuition is $8,000 and you typically offer 20% across all of your families in financial aid, this is what your NTR figure is for any particular family every year. This is great, but what we're really talking about is the total contract value. So then when one family comes in pre-K, it's not an $8,000 family. This is a $64,000 family in terms of what they're going to be able to contribute to your school. So we want to pay attention to this. This is really important. And that net tuition revenue at the total contract value is $51,200. The goal, obviously, is to drive this number up as high as we can. So if we can get more families off of financial aid, see what that does to our numbers. So now we're actually getting a higher factor of the dollars that we're trying to chase. We also have marketing return on investment calculator for you here, so that as you are adding items into your spends, whether it's a magazine ad or Google, look back and see how many inquiries you might have gotten that came in from each one of these, and you can see what your return on investment is. So in this case, a Google ad that you spent $1,000 on might have brought you 100 inquiries, 50 applicants, and 20 enrolled, which generated $160,000 in tuition, which is based off of this number here, which gives you 160x ROI on that Google ad. Okay, so this is the kind of thinking you should be doing from a key performance indicator standpoint. This is a big one. MROI is a big one. And then finally, this last sheet right here, which I think is maybe a little bit overwhelming, but the idea is to track how many students you have. You'll see your class sizes, which are represented here, and then you can change them with this slider right there, which changes the number of students, which also changes the gross tuition for that class, the financial aid expected, which you would change here with your financial aid full pay rate, and then your retention rate and how many students you should expect back year over year. So, 90% is a very healthy school, and that tells you, as we're looking here, and then with how many transfers we're factoring in, what does this look like for our enrollment of 247? Our net enrollment's 237, which means we're going to need to end up finding 10 kids. That's our number here. But what does that really mean in terms of tuition? So we need as many full pays as we can out of this. And this scenario builder will give you a lot of information to help you be better about what you're doing. Pardon me. And again, that will be made available for you. And I'm putting this into the chat window right now so that you can go out and grab your file when the conference is completed. It's also going to be available for you if you'd like to grab the file in the booth as well for Unbound 360. Okay. If we go back to the poll for a second, and let's see, tours was the #1 statistic that folks put in. And tours is a big one, right? That's getting people on campus, and that's really great. I think as we said earlier, getting them on campus is great. That next step is the what next, right? And we want to make sure that we're tracking that as well. Obviously, I love talking about this stuff. I love dealing with data, and I love helping schools be smart about the decisions they're making. So one of the things that we're going to make available for people, please stop by and see, have a chat with us at the booth. Please reach out to me on this email here, obviously jesse@unbound360.com. That's my phone number, and it will ring right now. If you decided to call that phone number on the screen, it will ring right here. That is our office line, so please don't hesitate to reach out. We are always interested in talking about admissions and talking about how to help schools be better with keeping people in Catholic schools, keeping our schools thriving, and giving you the information you need to make really great data-driven decisions. At this point, if there are any questions, I would love to entertain those. So please throw any questions you have in the Q&A or in the chat window, and I'm more than happy to answer some questions in the remaining 6 minutes that we have for this session. Before I do wrap, I do want to say thank you for taking your time, your professional development time to be with me today. And especially on a beautiful Saturday afternoon as it is here in Baltimore, to be out. Everyone would rather be outside or chasing a golf ball around or doing something like that. So I really do appreciate you taking the time to be with me. It means a lot to me, and I'm very happy to be doing this work to help Catholic schools be better at what they're doing and thriving. So with that in mind, I see some familiar names in our attendee list, which is great. And I'm certainly happy to, like I said, to answer questions. Let's see. Catherine Hackett. Can we explain the lookalike matrix a little bit more? Absolutely. So, pardon me. So your lookalike matrix essentially comes from your existing student body. And what we do is we look at your existing student body. We basically run it through there's some software that we have that shows you exactly where those commonalities are. Now you can find a lot of these commonalities as well yourself. I mean, you can throw those folks on a map. You can do a number of things. But the point of the lookalike matrix is to give you a very clear idea about what's important to your existing student body. For instance, you might find out in the lookalike matrix that your families, in particular, drive the Honda Odyssey as the #1 car on campus. That might tell you something very specific about the kind of cars that are important. So, anytime you see a Honda Odyssey come to campus for a tour, you know that you're probably speaking to your people at that point, right? You might also learn from your lookalike matrix that families typically like to travel by RV for their vacations. So you can get a lot of information that way, and that lookalike matrix, I think, helps you plan your marketing as well as plan, what you need to be saying to families. I said this in an earlier presentation. Too many of our schools are doing kind of one-size-fits-all messaging, and I would argue that a tool like a lookalike matrix would actually help you to develop language that is specific to each segment of the market that you're trying to chase. So that is an area where that particular tool comes in really handy. So great question, Catherine. Thank you. Thanks for throwing that out there. And I guess the other thing that I would throw in when I think about the KPI piece, and I want to show you an